before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment to make sure to thank everybody for including us, and including me in particular. I'm new to the Conscious Capitalist community and family, and I've enjoyed meeting so many of you, and I just want to make sure I know really who you are, your spirit, and bring that into our conversation.
Are you going to go around the room and ask everyone to say who they are?
No trust falls. There's going to be nothing like that. But I just want you to check my thinking. So far, I have discovered that you are all deeply passionate people, very different from each other, ideologically, from different sectors. You not only believe in the power of business to do good, it's now an imperative for you, even now more than ever as things seem so fraught. You're looking for new ideas, new metrics, new mechanisms to grow your business's initiatives, to transform your organizations if you're embedded in them. And you also need help pushing past resistance from financiers, from investors, from partners, but also from friends and family who may not quite be on board yet. Is that who you are? Have I understood who you are? So, true believers meet a conscious capitalist with a big checkbook.
Please form a line on this side.
I know. So why don't we start with what you're doing now, and we'll
Sure.
dig into your incredible, improbable life, and I'm saying that for a reason. Maybe we could start with what you're doing at Double Impact, how you got to Bain, and in particular, I'm curious if there was anything that you observed in your extraordinary two terms as governor about how business could do better in the world.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you, Ellen, for all those questions and for being a part of this program, and thank you all for having me today. So I left office at the beginning of 2015 and had gotten interested in impact investing through social impact bonds, which I learned about from a marvelous innovator in the space called Sir Ronald Cohen, who came through several years ago introducing the concept of impact bonds, or so-called pay-for-success contracts, to various sitting governors and mayors. And I got jazzed about that idea for reasons having to do with, frankly, my interest in innovation in public policy and how hard it is to innovate in public policy. And we did two of the first in the country when I was still in office. And he'd gone on then to create an impact investing fund. And I thought, that's something I'd like to try. When I was leaving office, it turns out that some friends of mine at Bain Capital expressed an interest in this same kind of investing. They had been trying to figure out how to get into the space, it turns out, for some while, and asked, and we, got talking, and they said, why don't you come in and help us figure it out? And we spent about a year talking to everybody who would talk to us all around the country, folks who were doing impact investing, folks who were thinking about investing in it, trying to think about where was the white space for a firm like ours, and where we could, what we could learn, and where we could contribute. And ultimately launched about 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years ago, a later stage private equity fund where we're investing only in North America at this stage, in lower middle market companies where we can generate both a private equity style return and a financial return and measurable impact in one of three areas: sustainability, health and wellness, and what we're describing as community building. And I can get into that some if you like. And it's been a gas. We set out to raise $250 million. We closed a little bit more than a year ago on $390 million. Nice. Which to me is a lot of money. I will say at Bain Capital, that's quaint. It's a sort of charming little fund. We closed today on our 6th deal. And we're off to the races. Just today, on number 6, we have 15 on the team, 14 of whom are experienced private equity investors, and who are a combination of transfers from other Bain Capital businesses and folks from outside the firm, from other middle market or impact funds, or a combination of the two. And we're making great progress in learning and trying to be humble contributors to building the space and to demonstrate at scale that you don't have to trade. You may choose to, but you don't have to trade return for impact.
So I'm curious about the deals or the pitches that you get, what you're listening for, and what you say yes to, and what kind of coaching do you give?
So, obviously we're listening for that equipoise between commercial seriousness and impact seriousness. And impact authenticity. I will say that not in every case is it obvious to the entrepreneur that they are an impact company. And by that I mean, there are companies we've talked to, in one or two cases we've invested in where they don't think of themselves necessarily as an impact-oriented enterprise, but in fact that's what they're doing. It's a wonderful company we invested in here in Texas, as a matter of fact, that diverts organic waste from landfills where it would otherwise decompose and turn into, greenhouse gas emissions.
Living Earth?
Living Earth, yes. And instead, recycles and composts the material and sells it back as composted soil and mulch. And the more they do, the more greenhouse gas emissions avoided. And they've been doing this for decades before folks start talking about greenhouse gas emissions. It's a tremendous company. It's a highly profitable company, and we're trying to take it to scale both here in Texas and around the region. And we are measuring those emissions avoided. I'm not sure that the founder necessarily thinks in terms of his impact first, but that business is inherently impactful. It's not the case with every business we see, but there's this wonderful phrase I heard in the speech in the fall in a very different context about how at this time, in particular in our sort of social journey in this country, that the woke need to leave room for the still waking.
Okay.
And that has so been on my heart. And I think of this in our business as well, that there's in this space of impact investing that we have to, we want to be very active owners and very active partners alongside management. And that means for us that there have to be those companies where we can manage toward greater impact and think about them and help them think about their long-term journey and how we get impact lock beyond our hold period. That may mean in some cases that they won't think of themselves as an impact company when they first make their pitch, but by the time we become partners, the objective is to have them do so.
So let's talk about the community impact part of it, because that seems to be, to me, the most complicated.
Yeah, it's the hardest.
Because you're dealing with real people's lives, and you're dealing with communities that have a very specific and often fraught history. Right. And often don't trust business. Right. Maybe you could give us a couple of examples of how you think about that.
Let me differentiate. So in sustainability, what we've been interested in are sustainable consumer goods, in urban agriculture, in water and energy efficiency companies, for example, that kind of thing. I put Living Earth in that thematic vertical. In health and wellness, we've looked at companies that are about access to affordable care, community-based care, home health care, that kind of thing. Behavioral health is a big interest of ours. Healthy eating as well. The company we closed on today is in that space as well. It's an ed tech company that's about closing skills gaps. Also, we've looked at companies around achievement gaps. Community building is a place-based strategy, and it's about companies that are intentional about trying to create jobs and catalyze economic activity in places of chronic underemployment. Right. And if you, after a conversation or two, can explain health and wellness and sustainability to investment bankers and other intermediaries, and they can source for you or help source for you, it's very hard to get that point, the community building point, across to investment bankers. And I think we have concluded we have to go find them. And so what we've done is identify the sort of criteria that we're looking for, and ranked both urban and rural communities around that criteria, and then started to put out our tentacles, not entirely, but mostly through that analysis. The top urban community is my old neighborhood on the south side of Chicago.
Right.
And so we're talking to everybody who'll talk to us, basically. And the conversations they're interesting, right? I mean, we're looking to do so-called control investments, and even that word is fraught.
It is.
Right? Because we're not actually interested in running the company.
Right.
And what we're interested in is having enough of a relationship that we can be real partners in helping to guide the company forward. But as I say, that word is fraught.
Yeah.
And we're in Boston, and they're in Chicago, and what does that really mean to have a relationship? What is it? Is there a sense of shared journey? So it's not just the sort of financial profile or the address that is enough. There's a lot of conversation that goes on, and that has to go on. And it's complicated, I guess I'd say.
Well, speaking of your beloved South Side, they're getting their first level 1 trauma center hospital
in a long time.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's been over 30 years.
Yeah.
And you grew up there.
I did.
Take us back to what life was like for you growing up, and how challenging it's been. 30 years, people died from gunshot wounds, and that had to be diverted 10, 15 miles away.
Yeah. Well, Southside is a complicated place, and it was more than 30 years when I left. Don't make me do all the math, but, not in front of everybody anyway. But when I grew up there, my sister and mother and I lived in our grandparents' 2-bedroom tenement with various other relatives who came and went. Most of that time on welfare. My sister and mother and I shared one of those bedrooms and a set of bunk beds. So you go from the top bunk to the bottom bunk to the floor every third night on the floor. We went to big and broken and under-resourced, sometimes violent public schools. I don't remember owning a book of my own until I got that scholarship Raj referred to in 1970 and went off to boarding school in Massachusetts. I mean, there was a lot about the neighborhood then that was broken. I will say, it was a time when every child was under the jurisdiction of every single adult on the block.
Right.
Right? So if you messed up down the street in front of Ms. Jones, she'd go upside your head as if you were hers, right? And then call home, so you got it 2 times. And I think what those adults were trying to get across to us was that membership in a community is understanding that you have a stake in your neighbor's dreams and struggles as well as your own. Right. That's a profoundly important lesson, I think. And it's a lesson in not just the South Side communities, it's a lesson in human yearning, I think. It still informs me. Did somebody just put up a South Side of Chicago
doesn't look like it.
Picture? It's a lesson in human yearning. It's a lesson, I think, that still informs me in how I think about all of the work I have done and the work we do today. And I think that sense of community has been coming undone over the years since 1970, and certainly I think it's a subtext or a context for the issues around what's been missing in the or the debate around the trauma center all these years. Yeah. It's not the only thing missing on the South Side. What's very, very interesting is with the presidential library, President Obama's library, coming to that old neighborhood, not far from the University of Chicago, there is a renewed focus on what's possible. I go back to the old neighborhood now, and the building where I lived and indeed was born is still there, but there are vacant lots everywhere. And many of them are owned by the city. And you can sense the developers kind of circling.
Right.
Right? Because they get what we get, right? Which is, this is going to be hip soon and valuable. And some of us have been trying to get the city to kind of get this notion and get the community to get this notion that maybe rather than just having this perennial debate about how to preserve pockets of poverty for poor people, why not place this land in trust for the residents and use it as an opportunity to lift people out of poverty so that people actually have a wealth creation opportunity as it happens. But we'll see. I don't know.
Is that a campaign that we can support? That
well, it's
we can
not a campaign. It's an idea.
It's an idea.
It's an idea. It's a, you know, this train is moving.
Right. It's coming.
It's happening. I think there are a number of people who are thinking about it as a marvelous young treasurer of the city who has it on his mind. There are a couple of other prominent church people on the South Side who are thinking about it, and you know, I keep chattering about it whenever, you know, I get an opportunity like this in hopes that it'll kind of catch on.
Yeah, I want to take a second to plug your book. I loved it.
Thank you.
A Reason to Believe, Lessons from an Improbable Life. And you can see where...
I think it's cheaper than Mr. Gelb's book.
It may be. It may be. And very much like listening to you speak, you are calm and open and gracious. You can sort of feel the good vibes coming off you, from
nice
you.
Of you to say. Thank you.
The stories are so sharp and real, including things that happened to you and your dad. I read it on a plane recently, and I started to cry 5 times. I mean, it really snuck up on me to the point where the flight attendant came over to make sure I was okay. And it's like, I don't want any problems on a plane. It's like, I'm fine. It's just a book. It's a book. But I cannot recommend it enough, and I'd love to have people read it in your gatherings so I can come and talk to you about it, because it struck me, reading it, that there was and there's no political kiss and tell stuff, really, although there's a great Jeff Sessions story that I loved.
Please.
But it felt like I was being reminded of who I'm working for. At every stage of your life, you're the person from birth to C-suite that we should be designing interventions for. And in addition to your talent and your hard work and all of the things that you did to make yourself successful, you interfaced with the world that was prepared to support you.
Wow, thank you.
So as we're winding down here, what should the people in this room who are designing products and services and trying to convince their leaders and managers to be more conscious, be thinking about in terms of intervening in communities unlike theirs, and making sure that people who are different from them are being given access to all the opportunities that they may have had?
Wow. Well, you saved the most impossible question for the end, or near the end. You know, humility is an underappreciated quality. We don't listen well enough. I think it's true of senior leadership in almost every sector I've worked in, and I've worked in, I think, almost every sector, because I zig and zag. I've worked in government, I've worked in business, I've worked in philanthropy. And the more senior, the more sure people are. And I feel like the more senior, the less sure I am. The longer I'm around, the more nuanced, the more surprised I am, the more delighted I am, the more amazed I am by the inventiveness and the kindness of people. The meanness too, you know, don't get me wrong, the smallness. But, you know, I was thinking about this. listening to the previous couple of presentations, both Mr. Gelb's marvelous talk, but also the presentation and the comments of the presenter and the recipient of the award just before we came up. Sometimes there are these little gestures of grace by totally anonymous people that are profoundly impactful. And one of them I touch on in the book. I didn't mean to come back to the book, but it's on my mind now since you gushed about it.
It's a really good book.
But I remember once being in Chicago, home on a school vacation, and I was late to meet somebody, and I had to get a bus to go meet them. And I went running to the bus, and I got there on Garfield Boulevard just as the city bus was coming, and I jumped on the bus, and the bus started to pull away, and I was standing there at the coin box, and I realized at that point, as the bus was pulling away, that I didn't have enough money for the fare. And I'm looking ridiculous, and this old black guy with his grizzled beard is driving the bus, and I'm standing there looking silly. And he pointed to the chair closest to the door, and he says, "Sit down, son." And I sat down. I knew I was going to get it. And I started to explain that I'm sorry, I've been away. I was in a hurry. I didn't have I wasn't trying to beat the CTA, Chicago Transit Authority, out of the fare. And he turned from the road and he looked me over real quick, and he sized me up the way people who serve the public can do in an instant.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And he turned back to the road, and his expression softened, and he said, "Just pass it on, son. Just pass it on." It's such a tiny little gesture of grace, just grace. And it made me want to be better. It just made me want to be better. And I think that it feels like we are in a moment where more and more of us, in and out of the conscious capitalist movement, whether folks are self-identified or not, are making choices about what to buy, what to own, what to do, how to be,
what to share on social
what
media.
to share, that we want to be more, to reflect more of our values. And that's a really encouraging thing. And to let that sense of meaning occupy not just our after hours, but our work, and not just our work, but our capitalism, not just our volunteerism, but our capitalism. This is a moment to seize. And it turns out, I think, and this is, I think, the really good news for the folks who aren't in this room, but who work with me and my firm, it turns out there's a premium to be harvested in the market for companies who dedicate themselves thus. And that's a really exciting thing. So, anyway.
We literally have just a minute left. Is there anything else that you can think of, either practically or philosophically, that this particular audience would need to know to begin to amplify those moments of grace on a regular basis in their lives?
Well, listen, I just got here a few minutes ago. I'm not gonna, I hope you will continue to teach me. I saw a number of folks in the room on the way in, or in the hall on the way in, who my team or I spoke to as we were thinking about how to launch our fund, and a number of people we talked to when we were in the early days. And I hope you'll continue to talk to us and teach us, because we're still learning. Okay. And this is just Fund 1 on the way to Fund 2 and 3. And I guess I would just say this point about the woke leaving room for the waking.
I love that.
I just, look, we are, sanctimony is a funny poison. It's at a time when folks feel, by the way, I'm not saying you are. That's not my point. I just feel like we have to be very, very careful not to exclude people who aren't as far on their journey as we feel we are on ours, because it is a journey. Anyhow, that's all I want to say.
Governor Deval Patrick.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.